Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. A weekly feature on Lake George Radio, 93.5 FM, and live streaming at lakegeorgeradio.com. Here's the president of the Lake George Battlefield Alliance, John DiNuzzo.
Good morning, this is John DiNuzzo of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance. I'm joined by Bruce Venter, a member of the Board of Trustees, and today we're going to talk about the statues in Lake George Battlefield Park, many of which are iconic and have dated back to the point where they're now actually part of the history of Lake George. Bruce, I think the earliest statue we have in the park is the one that's in the Battlefield Park Alliance's logo. The statue is officially called the Battle of Lake George, and it features King Hendrick and Sir William Johnson.
The one thing that strikes me is that it was put up in 1903, and if you find any photos from that time period, you will find that there were thousands of people at the dedication of that monument. And it's a shame because I don't think we would draw thousands of people if we dedicated the same monument again today. No. And that is reflective of our culture or lack of interest in history, and it really concerns me.
I understand that. I mean, on the contrary, not to disagree, but there are
No, I don't think you should disagree. I think you should agree with me. You're the president of the alliance.
There are fewer distractions, let's say, fewer competing attractions back in 1903. Now, you would remember what the other kinds of things that were going on then, but
I know.
Those of us, but that was actually the 150 or 148th anniversary of the Battle of Lake George, and that was dedicated. It was Governor Odell of New York who dedicated the statue, and he was joined by the governors of Vermont and Connecticut for that. So it was a major event, and if you see the photos that we have in the visitor center at Lake George Battlefield Park, you'll see thousands of people, as Bruce said, and also it was wide open. There's very little else in the park, and the state had just assumed control of the park, I think, 5 years earlier. So any significance? I mean, it's a beautiful statue. Was there any significance that you see associated with that?
Well, I think because it brings to light a very important person in the 18th century, Sir William Johnson. And I may have said this on a previous broadcast, but he is an underappreciated historical figure. And I think that we should really emphasize his contribution pre-American Revolution America. He was very influential with dealing with the natives, particularly the Iroquois Confederacy. He was a successful general here at Lake George. Now, he did, of course, accumulate quite a bit of land and wealth from his associations with the Iroquois. But I think that we can generally say that he treated them fairly. And he dressed as a Iroquois at various conferences. He spoke the language. His last common law wife was a Mohawk, Molly Brant, and he had 8 children with her. He's a very interesting character, and we really don't hear enough about him in the current day.
Yeah, well said. And as I said, that is probably the greatest icon that we have in the park is that statue. The next in chronology was the Mohawk Warrior, which was dedicated in 1921. Beautiful statue that we hope to refurbish in the near future. What strikes at you about that representation, Bruce?
I understand that the model for that statue was not a Mohawk. I think it was a Sioux Indian. Not that it takes away from the statue at all, but it's interesting how he accomplished what he wanted to by using a model who was not of this area.
And the sculptor is named Alexander Phimister Proctor, who was most well known for sculpting scenes of the West. And in fact, there's a museum somewhere in Washington State dedicated to him. So the natural element, the warrior is dipping his hand into the water at a stream, it evokes a nice era of pre-colonial northeastern, what is now the United States. We go to the St. Isaac Jogues statue, dedicated in 1939, just before the outbreak of World War II.
What I like about this statue is that it is authentically sculpted, which, by the way, all 3 of these statues that we're talking about, you'll find on our excellent website, Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance. Great detail if anyone wants to know more about these statues. But it gets down to even the fact that Isaac Jogues has his fingers removed by his association with Mohawks.
Isaac Jogues was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church in the early 1930s, I believe. Now, we have, other than statues, we have other important memorials in the park.
Yes, in 1926, at the 150th anniversary of the American Revolution, the state of New York and the state of Massachusetts came together and created about 64 monuments that follow the Knox Trail from Fort Ticonderoga all the way over to Dorchester Heights in Boston.
And then finally, but certainly not least, the 4 unknown soldiers who were reburied in our park in 1935.
That's right. And we like to think these are the original unknown soldiers, unknown Americans. In Washington, D.C., the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is represented by a veteran from World War I. That's when it was started. Going back to the colonial era, the men who fought at Lake George were Americans. They were Englishmen, but they were Americans too. And so I think we have a pretty good shot at saying we have the original unknown soldiers for our country.
If not for that, we might be speaking French today. Within eyeshot of where those 4 unknowns are reinterred, we have another planned reinterment happening in the park over the next couple of years.
That's right. We're going to rebury the individuals from Cortlandt Street. We know for sure that some of them were in the 1st Pennsylvania Battalion. It'll be a beautiful, beautiful monument to those people.
Thank you, Bruce.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. A weekly feature on Lake George Radio, 93.5 FM, and live streaming at lakegeorgeradio.com. If you have any questions regarding Lake George Battlefield Moments, email info@lakegeorgebattlefield.org. And tune in every Saturday morning at 9:45 for Lake George Battlefield Moments.